These past few weeks, we've been kind of journeying through Galatians, and this one passage we've been journeying through of the fruit of the Spirit. We've been digging into what it means for us to live that out, what it means for us to be changed by the fruit of the Spirit. And what's so incredible is, I don't know about you, but I've seen myself kind of catching maybe myself in certain moments, in certain situations. And I've been kind of trying to look at how I act or how I speak or how I do something in accordance to the fruit of the Spirit. And my hope is that we would truly be changed. Our lives would be different because of it. That maybe, just maybe, how we love one another would change and would be seen differently. That we would desire to have a deeper love than just what is surface level. Or our joy. What about how we live when it comes to having joy in life? Not happiness, not just these moments that are fleeting where we're happy one moment and sad the next, but a deep found joy in Jesus. A joy that can only come from the Father and Jesus and not just things of this world. That we would also find peace in a world that is ever changing, a world that is ever confusing, if we're just going to be real, in a world that seems to be at war with itself every single moment of every single day, that we would find true peace, and that we would live in the peace, we would dwell in His peace. And what would it look like for us to have patience like God shows us? This is a tough one. I remember the week we talked about patience, and I remember it leading into that week, I was tested with patience. But what does it look like for us to have the patience that God has given us? What does it look like for us to live in and of that patience that God not just shows us, but He modeled for us, and we are called to do that as well, and to have kindness for one another. Let it flow through us and seep out from every single moment of our lives to others, that it would be real. And people would see also the goodness of God because of how we live. That His name and His kingdom would be grown because of our lives, and that we would be able to model Him in this world. And His goodness for us. That even though while we were still sinners, He came to die for us, because He doesn't just do good things. God is good. And when we share of His faithfulness, man, this is one of the best parts. I love being able to talk about how God has been faithful, how God has provided, how God has been present every moment of every single step of the way, like God's faithfulness. And that message last week where we were able to talk about His faithfulness, talk about how He is faithful in the moments, even when we might not understand or see everything, God is faithful. And I truly believe that when we seek to live out as Christ lived, when we not just seek to live as Christ, but to love as Christ and model this as Him, that we truly would see our lives, and who knows, maybe even those around us, be changed. And maybe, just maybe, our world shift. But in these moments, I think in our world, as I kind of look at things, I see our world kind of in this crucial crossroads. And I think our world, and even maybe sometimes ourselves, we're telling ourselves just to let things go, to not engage with certain conversations, with certain things. In a way, we're telling ourselves, and maybe our world is telling us, to just don't even bother to have those conversations, to just let it go. Just be gentle. Don't ruffle any feathers. Don't make any waves. Don't rock the boat. And I think when it comes to this idea we're talking about today of gentleness, I think our world has equated gentleness similar to the way that we talked about with kindness, of this thing of non-confrontational, accept everything, don't question everything or anything, but rather just go along with the crowd. And I'm at a place, I think, where that is uneasy for me. And I don't know if that's exactly what Jesus would agree with gentleness. I don't see, when I read about Jesus, him just allowing anything and everything to happen. But Jesus did so much out of gentleness too. And I want to talk about that today. I want to talk about the reality of who Jesus was. And when we talk about gentleness, I want to talk about his gentleness, but even our own gentleness in life. And it's fitting that today, as we're talking about gentleness, and the thing that I want to kind of maybe even open up with is this idea of, have you ever had a scrape or maybe a cut? And maybe you needed to take care of it. Have you ever done something where you had to maybe pour some hydrogen peroxide on a cut? If I reflect back on actually very recently playing softball, I slid and I have a raspberry on my leg. And there's this moment where like I got home and I'm like, all right, I know I got to clean this thing out. So I pour some hydrogen peroxide on it, and you know what happens. I'm not going to go in details of it, but there's this moment of like, it actually stings a little bit, right? It's cleaning it out, but I'm gentle. It's the same thing with like, if you ever gotten a thorn maybe or a splinter stuck in your hand, like you're gentle as you try to pull it out, but there's still a little bit of pressure you have to do. And to get a splinter out, you might actually have to open up the wound a little bit more to be able to actually grab it and remove it. But you're still careful to not push too hard. You're careful to not make the wound worse. You're gentle, but there's also times where you have to maybe put some pressure on it to slow the bleeding down. And maybe, just maybe, you actually have to poke some holes with a needle and some thread and close it up with some stitches. But you do all of these things with gentleness still. Remember back when you were a kid and you were first learning to ride your bike? I'm sure for most of us it was that moment, right, where you're holding on to the back seat of the bike and maybe one of the handlebars, and your kid is sitting there and you're trying to run with them, right? And they're trying to learn how to balance, so it's a little wobbly. But then there's that moment where they got the pedaling down and the wobble kind of goes away and you start to let go and you watch them go. But what happens most of the time? They fall and they get scraped up. And you know the gentleness you take to care for those wounds, but there's also moments where you have to maybe apply pressure to slow down the bleeding so that they can take a breath and that they can eventually get back up and try again. I think oftentimes we need to remember that being gentle does not equal being hands off. But rather, in Jesus modeled this, being gentle sometimes means speaking up. And sometimes means going against the grain. In Jesus, in Matthew 11, this is what he says. And Jesus here he modeled true gentleness. He talked about it and showed it in his own life. In Matthew 11, it talks about it in this way, verses 28 through 30. And he's talking here, and he's giving a prayer of thanksgiving. And then he says this, "Come to me all who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest in your souls. My yoke is easy to bear. The burden I give you is light." Here Jesus is, and he's talking all about coming to him and exchanging his burden for your burden. He wants to help you. He wants to walk with you. He speaks of his character, that he is gentle and humble, that he has a servant heart. And I want to look at that today, because I think gentleness and servant's heart mentality goes a long way. And we're called to point and show others what Christ has been doing and is doing in our lives. And he invites his followers to do the same thing. He invites his followers to join with him and walk in towards the will of the Father. He shows his gentle heart, offering the yoke exchange. He models what it means for us to take a gentle servant's heart. That might mean us taking on something that is hard, is uneasy. As we serve others, we show his character, we show his gentleness and his love in life. And I remember talking with somebody a while ago, and in the conversation we were talking about what it means to be gentle. And this person is so much more wise than I am, and they said something along the lines of, nothing is as strong as gentleness. And nothing is so gentle as real strength. Gentle. Gentle. It's intriguing to me that on the Sermon on the Mount, one of the most widely known messages that Jesus gave, Jesus talks about it. It's one of the ones that he talks openly about. Matthew 5, God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for him. The kingdom of heaven is theirs. He blesses those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blesses those who are humble, they will inherit the earth. Blesses those who are hunger and thirst for righteousness and justice, for they will be satisfied. He blesses those who are merciful, they will be shown mercy. Blesses those whose hearts are pure, they will see God. Blessed those who work for peace, for they will be called children of God. Blessed those who are persecuted for doing right, their kingdom of God in heaven is theirs. He blesses you when the people mock you and persecute you. He goes on and on. And there's this moment in some translations where it talks about the meekness. It's the same word that we can translate in the Greek. It's the same word and root of gentleness here. That they know the need for redemption and Savior. And it's not themselves. This idea of being teachable. Being gentle is also being teachable. Knowing that you need to learn, that you need to grow. It's not demanding, it's not passive, it's not timid, but rather it's humble. And I truly believe that when we live this life of gentleness and realness in life, we get glimpses of God. I reflect back often, and I try to imagine what Jesus was like as a young boy. I don't know if Jesus had a bike. I think it'd be kind of cool if he made one and they had one, but I don't know if he did. But I try to picture what Jesus was like as a young boy. Like that early elementary age. You know that age where you're trying to teach your kid what it means to be kind and to share and to not be a mean person? Did Mary have to go through that with Jesus? Or was it just like he had it down? I wonder what Mary and Joseph had to teach Jesus about his character. I wonder what they had to teach him about manners and respect. I wonder if they had to teach him how to love his friends, how to share his toys, how to talk appropriately and nicely. Did Jesus have it down at a young age, or how was he parented? And I sometimes picture Mary looking at young boy Jesus, and you can almost hear her sometimes, right? The mother of Jesus reminding her son about the wisdom literature and what it says. Remember, Jesus, remember these things. Remember what you were taught. Remember what you've learned. Remember. Oftentimes we have to remind our children of things that we've taught them. It's like out of nowhere, it just disappears sometimes in their minds of how to share a toy, right? No, mine, Dad, mine. Remember what we told you about sharing and caring for another person? Remember. I find it intriguing that in the Wisdom Lit, Solomon, he writes these things, and one of the wisest, if not the wisest person to ever live, and he writes, patience can persuade a prince and soft speech can break bones. I'm looking at this and I'm like, patience can persuade a prince and soft speech can break bones. Let's talk about an illustration of power of gentleness above hardness and irritation. Soft speech. Our gentle words and attitudes can be just as strong and persuasive as harsh words or harsh actions. How do we model that in today's world? And if we're just going to be very honest, not just in today's world, but how do we model that on social media, in those conversations? We're in a year that, if you didn't know, by the way, an election is coming up. How do we model having gentle, loving words, even with something that we might not agree with? How do we walk in that? Again, in Proverbs 15, he says, a gentle answer deflects anger, but harsh words make tempers flare. Man, if we just lived out maybe these two verses in so many days, I wonder what our world would look like. And maybe for some of us, like, if we just observed those and instead of actually saying something, we just didn't say anything at all, what would change? Like, what could really happen if we truly live with this mindset of the wisdom of Proverbs? What things could maybe truly go smoother and better with words that are gentle in his spirit? And they're not filled with bitterness, with anger or hate, but rather gentleness, love, and grace, and mercy. I find it so intriguing as I'm just reflecting back on this series that I feel like this series was so perfect almost for the seasons that we're in. We planned this series literally months and months ahead of time. I try to have an idea of where we're going for our series and our messages and stuff, and I just felt like we needed to dig into this months ago. And as we're sitting now here, we never could have planned what was going to happen. I'm telling you, I didn't see a pandemic coming. I didn't see the riots coming. I didn't see the injustice coming. Like, I couldn't see it coming. But I believe that God had a way of orchestrating stuff to happen in the right moments, where we today are talking about gentleness and a time that we need to learn how to be more gentle and loving in our world. And I know a lot of people, especially when you get into digging into the word and what we believe, and the almost collision of what our culture says and what we're called to believe, and this collision, I feel like. But we can't forget that Jesus collided with his culture too. That we have to remember that there are times for overturning the money changers' tables. There are times for flipping the tables. There's times for also talking Zacchaeus out of the tree. There's times to send the accusers away and tell the woman to go and live her life again. There are times for all of these things, and we are in a moment in our world and our culture that I believe if we just simply quiet ourselves, quiet our minds, quiet our hearts, and quiet our spirits, and just say, God, what time is it today? God, are you asking me to stand up and to flip essentially over a money changer's table and to change things? Is this a moment where you're asking me, is this the timing of that? Or God, are you calling me to go over here and to gently call somebody out to come and dine with me, to be with me, so I can show them your presence? Let's also not forget Zacchaeus in his job. He was not liked. He was a guy who collected taxes. He scammed people of money. And Jesus calls him out of the tree and says, let's go grab a burger. I'm coming on over. We can't forget that as he stands there with the woman and all these accusers are standing there. And then he looks at her and he looks at them and he says, go for it. Only if you've never sinned. I'll wait. Jesus was gentle in every single one of these moments. He was gentle with the woman as he looked at her and he said, I know what you've done, but nobody condemns you, neither do I, so go and sin no more. He showed her mercy and grace and love in those moments. He was gentle. Zacchaeus, he could have looked at Zacchaeus, and the things he could have told Zacchaeus, the judgment he could have casted on him. But instead, he was gentle and he just said, hey, I'm going to invite myself over to your house. Hopefully it's clean. Let's throw some burgers on the grill and let's talk a little bit. And in the temple, I love this story in the temple. Because we get this image of Jesus that is passionate. And I think when we read it, sometimes we have this idea that Jesus isn't really gentle in those moments. When he's flipping over a table and making a whip. He's the opposite of gentle. That's our mentality. But what if Jesus was actually gentle in that moment with what he did? Because the actual reality of the wrath that should have came on them in those moments is much and far greater than what Jesus did in those moments. I truly believe that in these moments, when we quiet our own hearts and our own spirits and let his Spirit speak and move us, his Spirit will guide us and direct us accordingly. In the moments where we're called to take action, to have a righteous anger, a just anger, he will direct us in that. In the moments where we're called to speak against what somebody's doing out of love and gentleness, he'll direct us to do that. In the moments where we're called to help somebody get up and to walk in their life and be changed, the Spirit's going to guide us in that. Gentleness and anger are not at opposite ends, I don't think, always. I think we can be gentle in a righteous anger. I think it can be justified. But how we deal with anger and how we act out of anger can make or break relationships. But it can also lead to bitterness, personally, which gets us nowhere. And I truly believe that this is what we're talking about, is not only gentleness, but even how we are called to walk in gentleness when things of this world are not how they're supposed to be. If we act out of anger and not righteous anger, not out of a gentle anger, but rather it's just this emotional stance, we're not acting in the spirit of gentleness. I think we've seen this played out in our world. I think we've seen this played out in what we've just encountered these past few months. I do believe that there's been a righteous, just, and maybe even almost this holy discontent anger that has bubbled up in maybe some believers. We've seen unjust things happening from death and riots and pain and brokenness to stealing and destruction and pain. We've seen unjust things that have happened, and it's been bubbling up to the surface for some of us. We've heard and seen the brokenness in our world when it comes to the sin of selfishness, of racism, of bitterness, brokenness. We've seen the hatred among people, and even within families that have been torn apart. We're seeing it even within families that are not just bickering anymore, but are almost disowning each other because we can't operate out of gentleness. And I think that right now is a perfect opportunity for us as believers and followers of God to step and stand in the gap and to be his presence like it's never been before, to be his hands and feet like this world maybe has never seen or experienced before. I'm blown away by how Christ acted in those moments. Not just at the temple or with Zacchaeus or even the woman, but of all these other moments. Let's just talk about, there's two guys. Let's talk about the moments where Jesus was certainly able to be mad at Peter for what he said. Multiple times, by the way. He also could have been mad and upset at Peter for what he did, multiple times, by the way. But yet Jesus chose a different route. Or what about Judas? He could have been mad and upset and frustrated and acted out of an emotional stance of anger towards Judas, but instead, he chose a different route. What if we as Christ followers were known more for our feet washing rather than our sin bashing? What if we as Christ followers were known more for how we serve and love each other regardless rather than our sin bashing? What if we took the posture of Jesus in the upper room where he gets down on his hands and his knees and he washes the feet of his disciples? The one who will deny him in a few short hours washes his feet. The one who will betray him with a kiss washes his feet. The others who will scatter after he dies washes their feet. The one who will look at him and doubt him to his face until he shoves his finger through the holes washes his feet. What if we were known more for our grace giving than our grudge holding? What if we were known more for what we are about rather than what we are against? What if we were known more for our love, our passionate love for each other and love for God, rather than the hatred we have for things in this world? All of this, I believe, stems from a posture of gentleness in the Spirit. What if we flipped the script like Christ did so often, and we followed what he actually did and said? Paul, in the New Testament, he urges the church in Corinth with meekness and gentleness in Christ to do the work. To do the work. In Galatia, he talks about and he urges for mercy for those who have fallen from the faith. But instead, I believe in our world, we rather try to keep it and play it safe. We keep people who are messy, who will push us and even ask us the hard things and to do the hard things in life. We keep them at arm's length away because it's a lot easier to deal with them at that length than really close to you. But Jesus didn't do this at all. As a matter of fact, Jesus, multiple times, over and over and over, if you didn't know this, his disciples were really messy. And I'm not just talking about the physicalness, like not cleaning up their plates. I'm talking their lives were messy. One would deny him, one would betray him, one would doubt him, and many others would abandon him. And then he comes back. And even then, they still had questions. After he comes back, what's the first thing that Jesus does? He makes them breakfast. Gentleness. Gentleness. I love that Christ modeled that. Because for me, I've struggled with this sometimes. I'm someone who, believe it or not, growing up, I always had this short fuse and a really hot temper. Something goes wrong and I just fly off the handle. I don't get the right softball call, fly off the handle. But Christ modeled what it means for us to be gentle in his spirit. And gentleness does not mean being a pushover. Gentleness does not mean not making waves or rocking the boat or questioning wrong things in life. Gentleness means quieting yourself and allowing the Spirit to lead you in how to act. To show his love even in the midst of persecution. To show grace even in the midst of being wronged. Gentleness. When Paul writes to the church in Thessalonica, he talks about being gentle as a mother, tenderly caring for her children. To be gentle as a mother. I remember the first night when we took home our little one. I remember the phone call. Courtney just got done running the color run, a 5K in downtown GR. We looked at our phone and we had a missed call, and we call back and it's our caseworker. And we're informed that little guy is ready to go home. He spent the 2 weeks in the NICU, and we fly home, we shower, she showers really quick. I'm literally throwing stuff into my car. When I say literally throwing stuff, I'm literally throwing the car seat, because I don't know how to strap it in totally at this moment, into my trunk. I'm freaking out. I'm like, I don't know what to bring. Do I need to bring him a drink? Like, what does he even drink? He can't have Red Bull. I need a Red Bull. Do I need to bring a blanket? Do I need to bring clothes? Does he going to come home with clothes? Is he not? Like, I am freaking out. And Courtney is just like, I've got it all set. We're good. You just drive. And I'm like, I can do that. And I remember getting there and holding this little 5-pound baby in my hands, and they're teaching us how to feed this baby. And I had to feed him a certain way because of his size, and I'm nervous. I'm nervous I'm going to break this kid. I'm nervous I'm going to do it wrong. I'm watching Court, and she has it all down. Like, it's natural. And me, it's like trying to fumble through figuring out how to actually do this. Be as gentle as a mother tenderly caring for her children. That first night we got home, and I wish I was joking. The very first thing I did is I walked in with the baby seat, and he was still in it. And he barely fit in that thing. He was so small, and I kind of set him in the middle of our living room. I set him down super gently, and I sat on the couch, and I was directly across from him. And I remember staring directly into his big brown eyes and just looking at him. And I remember looking at him, and the first thing I said to him is, I don't know what to do now. And that night, man, he didn't want to sleep good. I like sleep. And I remember the 3 a.m. where he woke up, and I'm trying to feed him. I'm holding him on my lap, and I'm trying to feed him, and he's taking his bottle, and then I'm holding him. I'm rocking him to sleep. Trying my best. I had this real fear of breaking him. Like, I had this deep fear that I was going to mess up so bad that I'm going to break this child. What if I hold him wrong? What if I feed him wrong? I'm going to mess him up. I'm going to break him. I'm going to do all these things wrong. But I learned very quickly at those 3 a.m. feedings. I learned that he was a gentle kid. Even when I messed up, I learned a lot from him at 3 a.m. He only liked to be held on one side. I'd put him in my left arm, and he would cry and cry and cry. But I'd switch him over to my right arm, and within 30 seconds, this 5-pound baby is snoring. He had a little gas bubble, and he just needed a little help working it out. He was gentle with me. He was so gentle, and he just told me, in just the way he lived his life in those moments, how he loved me in those moments, how he was gentle, and showed me a lot of grace in those moments as I learned what it meant for me to care for this little baby. He didn't yell at me. He didn't tell me how much of a moron I was because I couldn't figure out how to hold him in the right arm. Instead, he just showed me what it meant to be gentle. Even to this day, I never would have guessed this little 5-pound baby is now this 2-year-old that is just a linebacker. But yeah, he's so gentle. I got home from my softball game and he saw the strawberry on my leg, and the first thing he did is he just walked up. "Owie, Dad. Owie." And he kissed my hand, and then he said, "All better." Now for about half a second, all the pain in my leg was gone. But then the next half a second, it came right back. But he was so gentle. And he is. Just like a mother who cares for her children with gentleness, there's still stern love, grace, and mercy in her care. I had to learn what it means to be gentle even in discipline. Gentle even in those moments of fear, uncertainty, and brokenness. Gentleness. As we close today with our last song, I want to leave us with maybe a observation. There's a reality for me that I truly believe Christ calls us to live in the same way that he lived. I believe that Christ calls us to live as he has lived, to do as he has done. And that means we're called to live with grace, to live out truth, to live out love and gentleness and hope and life that is solely rooted in him. I've said it a few different times now, but the more I read this, the more I see how much I need God to continually renew and transform and work in me. I'm brought back to that day. Brought back to that day in my living room looking at this little child and just trying to figure it out. And over these past 2 years, there were days where I looked at this same child and I've had to correct him and discipline him. Maybe a timeout. And I look at how God has acted with me and the reality that He's shown a lot of gentleness with me, even in the moments of correction and discipline. And I just believe that there are times in our lives that God's going to call us to flip over those tables, to do so out of gentleness, knowing that when we flip that table, the wrath that really should be going on right now and doing from Him is nothing compared to the gentleness of flipping that table and correcting them. The moments and the words we speak to the Zacchaeus of our days, correcting, instructing, and actually sitting down and having conversations with each other. It's all rooted out of love and gentleness. In those moments where we have our brothers and sisters who fall, and everybody around them might be pointing at them, we're called to show love and gentleness like Christ loves, and show gentleness to us. Let's get really good at that. Let's get really good at removing our own selves and letting the Spirit move us. Let's get really good at being who God asks us to be, and just follow Him.